A man with rippling muscles and unmatched strength, he single-handedly defeated a lion with his bare hands. He struck down 1,000 Philistines using only the jawbone of a donkey and carried the gates of Gaza for miles. He tied the tails of 300 foxes together, attached burning torches to them, and released them into the Philistine fields to destroy their resources. Yet, his life took a tragic turn when his wife took away the strength given to him by God. This event led to many heartbreaking stories in his family's history. Who is he? With such extraordinary strength granted by God? Join us to find out in detail. Philistine Oppression. The story of Samson, found in the Bible, begins during a time of great suffering for the Israelites. They were under the oppressive rule of the Philistines for 40 long years, a period marked by hardship, misery, and submission. During this dark chapter, God intervened with a miraculous message. In the town of Zorah, there was a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan. Manoah's wife was barren and unable to conceive, a situation often viewed in that culture as a source of sadness and disappointment. However, one day, she received a visit from an angel. An angel of the Lord appeared before Manoah's wife and delivered a profound message to them. The angel acknowledged her childlessness, but then declared a miracle. She would conceive and bear a son. The angel revealed that this son would not be an ordinary child, but one dedicated to a special purpose from birth. The angel instructed her to follow specific dietary and lifestyle practices, including abstaining from wine, fermented drinks, and any unclean food, symbolizing the holiness of the child she would bear. Furthermore, the angel explained the appearance of her future son. No razor was ever to touch his head. This boy would be a Nazirite from the womb, set apart for God's purpose. This boy was named Samson, meaning of the sun. He was the son of Manoah, born in the town of Zorah in the tribe of Dan near the border of Judah. Samson's home was near Bethshemesh, meaning house of the sun. Samson's birth was announced by an angel during Israel's dark period, as they were under Philistine rule and oppression. Destined to be a Nazirite from birth, Samson was granted extraordinary strength from God to fulfill his mission of delivering Israel. As a Nazirite, Samson would lead a dedicated life, bound by special vows that included abstaining from cutting his hair, a symbol of his unique calling and evidence of his role as a servant of God. The angel explained that this child would be Israel's leader in the fight against the Philistines, delivering them from their oppressors. This prophecy foreshadowed the remarkable journey Samson would undertake, marked by feats of strength and divine interventions. Overwhelmed by this news, Manoah's wife quickly ran to tell her husband, who, filled with reverence and a sense of responsibility, prayed to God for further guidance on raising the promised child. In response, the angel returned, and Manoah requested further clarification on the boy's life and purpose, seeking to fulfill God's will for their son. The angel repeated the same instructions to ensure that the child's upbringing would align with God's commands, emphasizing that the boy was destined to be a Nazirite, just as the angel had prophesied. Manoah's wife soon bore a son, whom they named Samson. As Samson grew, it became clear that God's blessing was upon him. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him, preparing him for the great task ahead, to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Empowered by God, Samson would soon perform incredible feats of strength, unlike anything ever seen before, foreshadowing his role as Israel's protector. The story of Samson's birth and early life is one of divine intervention, hope, and purpose. It highlights God's compassion for his people and his power to work through chosen individuals for a special purpose. Samson's life as a Nazirite set him apart, and his journey reflects both his personal struggles and the great potential God placed in him. This story serves as a reminder of faith, obedience, and the mysterious ways in which God's plans unfold to fulfill his promises. Even amidst suffering, through Samson, Israel would witness God's deliverance, though it would come through both triumph and tragedy. Divine strength. As Samson grew, the Spirit of the Lord began to work powerfully within him, driving him to fulfill the purpose he was born for, to begin freeing Israel from the oppressive rule of the Philistines. This strength was not merely physical, but also a manifestation of God's presence, making Samson a protector of Israel during an era of suffering under foreign domination. His journey and actions reflect both the divine calling on his life and his personal challenges, showing the tension between his role as God's chosen deliverer and his own human desires. One of the defining events in Samson's life was his journey to Timnah, a Philistine city, where he saw and desired a Philistine woman as his wife. This decision confused and troubled his parents, who questioned why he would choose a Philistine woman over one from his own people. They didn't understand that God was orchestrating events through Samson's desires, using this unconventional choice as an opportunity to confront the Philistines. Samson's pursuit of a Philistine wife was part of God's larger plan to bring justice and challenge those oppressing Israel. Forbidden marriage. Samson decided to marry a Philistine woman, a choice that caused his parents great distress. In Israel at that time, intermarriage with the Philistines, a foreign and pagan people, was often discouraged due to religious and cultural differences. Samson's parents urged him to find a wife from their own people, the Israelites, expressing their concerns about his decision. However, Samson remained firm, believing that the woman from Timnah was the right choice for him. What his parents didn't realize was that God was using this desire as a means to provoke a confrontation with the Philistines, the oppressors of Israel. Through Samson's bold and seemingly unconventional choices, God was laying the groundwork for future deliverance. On the way to Timnah, Samson faced an extraordinary test of his strength and courage. As he traveled along paths lined with vineyards, a fierce lion suddenly appeared, charging at him with a terrifying roar. In that critical moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson, filling him with supernatural strength. With no weapons or armor, Samson grabbed the lion with his bare hands and tore it apart, an astonishing feat that highlighted the divine strength he was given. This remarkable victory over the lion served as a symbol of God's power working through him, affirming his role as Israel's champion. However, Samson told no one of this feat, keeping it as a private testament to the strength he had been granted for his mission. Later, as Samson returned to marry the Philistine woman, he passed by the place where he had killed the lion. There, he found a surprising sight. A swarm of bees had made honey in the lion's carcass. Samson scooped out the honey and tasted it, then shared it with his parents without revealing its source. This strange encounter with honey in the lion's carcass held symbolic meaning, reflecting both sweetness and danger, a fitting metaphor for Samson's life. Marked by moments of triumph as well as turmoil, the honey was an unexpected gift from God, serving as a reminder of his power and provision, even in unlikely places. The marriage to the Philistine woman was only the beginning of Samson's confrontations with the Philistines, each encounter revealing both his strength and his vulnerabilities. Although his choice of a wife from the Philistines seemed unusual and met with resistance, it was ultimately part of God's plan to punish Israel's enemies. Through this marriage, Samson would be drawn into conflict with the Philistines, which would shape much of his life's mission. The incident with the lion, in particular, symbolizes Samson's role as Israel's deliverer, equipped with God-given strength that defied natural limits. Despite his personal flaws and impulsive decisions, Samson's strength served as a reminder to Israel of God's unwavering power and his plan to liberate the nation from oppression. Riddle Conflict. At Samson's wedding, he boldly presented a riddle to the Philistines. This event took place after he married a Philistine woman in the city of Timnah, a marriage that caused discontent within his family, his people, and even among the Philistines themselves. Known for his strength and cleverness, Samson saw the wedding as an opportunity to challenge the Philistines, posing a riddle with a wager. If they could solve it within 7 days, he would provide them with 30 sets of clothes. However, if they couldn't solve it, they would owe him 30 sets of clothes, a significant sum meant to display his confidence and wit. The riddle, drawn from his own encounter with a lion and honey, was perplexing. Out of the eater, something to eat; out of the strong, something sweet. This referenced the lion he had killed barehanded and the bees that later built a hive in its carcass, filling it with honey. For Samson, the riddle encapsulated both the mystery of his strength and the sweetness of victory, a testament to his divine power. However, the Philistines were deeply frustrated by the challenge. Unable to decipher its meaning after several days, tensions rose as they grew increasingly desperate, finding no way to solve the riddle. On the 4th day, fearing humiliation and loss, the Philistine men turned to Samson's new wife, threatening her and her family to force Samson's answer from him. Terrified, she repeatedly begged Samson, expressing emotional distress and accusing him of not loving her. Despite Samson's initial resistance, her constant tears and anguish wore him down throughout the feast. Finally, on the 7th day, unable to bear her sorrow, Samson gave in and revealed the answer. She immediately relayed it to the Philistines. Just before sunset, they smugly answered the riddle, declaring, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson immediately recognized the betrayal and was enraged by the deception. He rebuked the Philistines with an indignant statement, saying, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." These words reflected both his disappointment in the betrayal and his sense of personal violation. Determined to fulfill his end of the wager, Samson left the feast in anger and went to the Philistine city of Ashkelon. There, he killed 30 men, taking their clothes to settle the debt, demonstrating both his divine strength and the intensity of his wrath. This story marks the beginning of a cycle of continuous conflict and violence between Samson and the Philistines. What started as a challenge of intellect turned into a deep-seated feud, as Samson realized what lengths the Philistines would go to manipulate and betray him. His marriage, built on an unstable foundation, fell apart further as his wife was soon given to another man, sparking Samson's desire for revenge and foreshadowing future battles. Revenge and wrath. After Samson returned and found that his wife had been given to another man, one of his companions, he was deeply hurt by this betrayal. Now he felt an intense sense of loss and extreme anger toward the Philistines, who had wronged him multiple times. Determined to seek justice in his own way, Samson devised a plan to humiliate and harm the Philistines by destroying their livelihoods. In an extraordinary act of strength, cunning, and resolve, he captured 300 foxes, tying them in pairs. He attached a burning torch to each pair's tails and released them across the Philistine fields, vineyards, and olive groves. As the terrified foxes scattered, the fire spread rapidly, consuming the harvested crops and vineyards of the Philistines. The sight of their fields engulfed in flames was terrifying, as these crops were vital to their economy and survival. This act of revenge showcased both Samson's resourcefulness and the extent of his anger, revealing the lengths he would go to retaliate against those who had wronged him. By setting their fields ablaze, Samson struck directly at the Philistines' survival, disrupting their food supply and economy, and causing widespread suffering. The Philistines were enraged, and their fury grew as they demanded answers. understanding that Samson's actions were a response to the betrayal involving his wife. The cycle of escalating violence became a hallmark of Samson's life, as his relationship with the Philistines was marked by a series of fierce confrontations. Although his actions stemmed from personal grievances, they also served a greater divine purpose by weakening the Philistine oppressors of Israel. Cycle of violence. After Samson burned the Philistine fields, vineyards, and olive groves to avenge the betrayal involving his wife, the Philistines retaliated with their own brutal vengeance. They sought out Samson's wife and her family and burned them alive to punish him for the destruction he caused. This act only fueled Samson's rage further, pushing him into a fierce battle where he attacked them ruthlessly and killed many. Samson's actions continued to create chaos not only among the Philistines but also within his own people, the Israelites, who felt the burden of his actions and feared retaliation. The Philistines intensified their attacks, mobilizing forces against Judah, where Samson had taken refuge in a cave. The Israelites, under constant Philistine oppression and wary of further bloodshed, began to view Samson's actions as a source of danger rather than deliverance. As a result, they came to confront him, sending a delegation of 3,000 men to the cave where he was hiding. There, they pleaded with him, questioning why he had provoked the Philistines and brought them even greater suffering. Samson explained his motives, emphasizing that his actions were simply acts of revenge. He had done to the Philistines what they had done to him. However, the Israelites were more concerned with avoiding further violence, and ultimately decided to hand him over to the Philistines to maintain a fragile peace. Samson agreed to surrender on the condition that his own people would not harm him. Bound with ropes, he was led out of the cave and handed over to the Philistine forces. As Samson approached the Philistines, they began to shout in triumph, believing they had finally captured their greatest enemy. However, at that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson with overwhelming power. The ropes binding him became like charred flax, easily snapping as his strength surged. Grabbing a fresh donkey's jawbone, Samson wielded it as a weapon and charged into battle, defeating 1,000 Philistine soldiers in an astonishing display of rage. The ground was littered with the bodies of his enemies, and Samson, standing victorious, declared, "With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." Although this victory was symbolic, it deepened the divide between Samson and his own people. The Israelites were caught between their desire to escape Philistine rule and the harsh repercussions of Samson's actions, which brought severe retaliation upon them. Jawbone Victory. After the battle, Samson cried out to God, recognizing his dependence on God's strength. Although he was endowed with extraordinary power, Samson realized that without God's sustaining presence, he was vulnerable. His plea reflected an acknowledgement that his victory and strength did not come from himself, but from God's support. Samson's words to God revealed a mixture of gratitude and urgency. He acknowledged that it was God who had granted him victory over the Philistines, but he also expressed fear of dying of thirst and potentially falling into the hands of his enemies. This moment captures a rare vulnerability in Samson, a man typically characterized by physical strength and resilient spirit. It reminds us that even the mightiest warriors are, at their core, human and reliant on God's mercy and provision. In response to Samson's earnest prayer, God performed a miracle, opening up a hollow place at Lehi, from which water began to flow. This unexpected source of water revived Samson, restoring his strength and spirit. The name of the place, En Hakkore, meaning Spring of the Caller, serves as a lasting testament to God's answer to Samson's plea. This miraculous provision emphasizes God's care and willingness to provide for his chosen servant, even in moments of weakness. The provision of water serves as a reminder of God's covenant faithfulness, showing that He sustains His people even in the most desperate circumstances. It also underscores the theme of dependence on God, a recurring message throughout Samson's life. Though known for his unparalleled strength, Samson's reliance on God was ultimately what sustained him. Delilah's betrayal. Samson's life took a fateful turn when he fell in love with Delilah, a woman from the valley of Sorek. Delilah was unlike any of Samson's previous relationships. She became the focal point of a crucial chapter in his story, as her actions ultimately led to his downfall. Samson's love for Delilah was deep, but it blinded him to her true intentions and the danger she posed. Seeing an opportunity to capture Israel's strongest warrior, the Philistine rulers approached Delilah with a tempting offer. They bribed her with a massive sum. Each ruler promised her silver if she could uncover the secret of Samson's seemingly invincible strength, driven by either greed or loyalty to her people. Delilah agreed to betray Samson, setting the stage for a heartbreaking tale of deception. Determined to fulfill her promise, Delilah began probing Samson, asking him to reveal the source of his strength. At first, Samson was cautious and gave her misleading answers. He told her he would become weak if bound with fresh bowstrings, then with new ropes, and finally if his 7 braids were woven into a loom. Each time, Delilah followed his instructions, binding him in different ways while Philistine soldiers waited nearby to capture him. But each time, Samson easily broke free, displaying his extraordinary strength and leaving the Philistines powerless against him. Delilah grew increasingly frustrated as she realized Samson had deceived her, confronting him with accusations of betrayal, questioning his love for her, and pressuring him to tell the truth. Day after day, Delilah persisted, wearing down Samson's resolve with her relentless pleas. Her persistence and emotional manipulation eventually took their toll on Samson, who became vexed to death by her constant demands. Finally, exhausted and unable to withstand her pressure any longer, Samson revealed the true source of his strength: his hair, which had never been cut. As a Nazirite dedicated to God from birth, Samson's uncut hair symbolized his consecration and unique relationship with God. By sharing this secret, Samson exposed the one weakness that could lead to his downfall. Realizing that Samson had finally told her the truth, Delilah sent word to the Philistine rulers, urging them to return. That night, as Samson slept on her lap, she called for someone to shave off his 7 braids. With each braid cut, Samson's strength diminished, and he became as weak as any other man. Delilah called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke, thinking he could free himself as before, but he did not know that the presence of the Lord had left him. Without his divine strength, Samson was easily overpowered by the Philistines. Captured and blinded, the Philistines captured him, and in a brutal act of humiliation and cruelty, they gouged out his eyes, leaving him blind. Samson, once feared and revered for his strength and victories over the Philistines, was now physically broken and defenseless. The Philistines brought him to Gaza, where they imprisoned him, binding him with bronze shackles and forcing him to do the menial labor of grinding grain in prison. The once mighty warrior who had slain thousands with a donkey's jawbone was reduced to a life of captivity and humiliation, laboring as a prisoner. The Philistines, who had long sought to defeat Samson, celebrated his downfall with great excitement. For years, he had been a formidable enemy, bringing them immense losses and fear. Now, having finally subdued their greatest foe, the Philistine rulers and people organized a grand festival to honor their god Dagon. Crediting Samson's capture to Dagon's power, they praised their god, proclaiming, Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and killed so many of us. The celebration underscored their sense of triumph over the man who had terrorized their people. Final act of strength. In the final chapter of Samson's life, we witness his ultimate act of faith and redemption. Captured, blinded, and humiliated by the Philistines, Samson is led by a young servant to the main pillars of the temple. Though physically wounded, Samson has regained spiritual clarity and strength. Realizing this is his last opportunity to fulfill his purpose. Samson prays to God. In a humble and desperate plea, he asks for one final act of strength. Lord, please remember me. Strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. This prayer marks a profound shift in Samson's relationship with God. The strength he once took for granted is now sought in a spirit of dependence and surrender. For the first time, he fully acknowledges that his power comes only from God and relies on divine grace rather than personal might. With this resolve, Samson braces himself between the 2 main pillars supporting the temple, placing his hands on each one. By the strength granted to him by God, he pushes with all his might. In an astonishing display of divine power, the temple begins to tremble, and the structure collapses, bringing down the roof and killing everyone inside, including Samson and the Philistine rulers. The destruction of the temple is sudden and catastrophic, with the cries of the Philistines filling the air as they realize their impending fate. In this single, sacrificial act, Samson fulfills his destiny. He deals a decisive blow to the oppressors of Israel, killing many of their leaders and crippling the Philistines' control over Israel. In his death, Samson completed his mission and found redemption. Though his life was marked by moments of weakness, impulsive decisions, and personal failures, his final act serves as a powerful testament to his faith and his role as a chosen instrument of God. Samson's life, though complex and often troubled, ultimately served a divine purpose, showing that even flawed individuals can achieve greatness when aligned with God's will. His death brings a powerful conclusion to his story, demonstrating that faith, even reignited at the end, holds redeeming power. Though Samson's story ends sadly with his death, there are many lessons we can draw from his life. We cannot misuse any gift that God has given us. God gave Samson extraordinary strength, but he often misused it, using his power to boast rather than to honor God. He learned the hard way that God can both give and take away gifts at any time. Sin leads to consequences. Samson didn't see the immediate payback for some of his sins until much later. But consequences often strike us at the worst possible times. When we feel the urge to act impulsively, as he did, we need to remind ourselves of the truth in Scripture. We will encounter many Delilahs in this world, people who will try to find and exploit our greatest weaknesses. Even at our lowest, God can still use us. Stripped of all his strength and severely humiliated, God restored Samson's power for one final battle. Though Samson died in the process, he ultimately defeated more of Israel's enemies than ever before during his days of boasting and revenge. Please subscribe to our channel to enjoy more captivating Bible stories from us.